He grabbed her shoulder like she was nobody, like she was invisible, like she didn't exist. Sergeant Kyle Maddox planted his hand on Ava Carter's back and shoved hard right there in the middle of the mess hall in front of every Marine, every sailor, every soul in that room. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her rank. He didn't know that the quiet woman in the white sports top and camo pants had survived things that would break most men before breakfast. He was about to find out, and so was everyone watching. Before we go any further, if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a story like this one. These are the stories that remind us what real strength looks like. Drop your city in the comments below. Tell me where you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's go back to that mess hall. The lunch rush at Naval Station Coronado was exactly what it always was. Loud, hot, crowded. Hundreds of men and women moving through the chow line with the kind of disciplined efficiency that military life drilled into you whether you wanted it or not. Trays sliding, boots hitting the floor, voices overlapping, the smell of industrial coffee and something that might have been beef stew fighting for dominance in the recycled air. Ava Carter stepped into line at exactly 1200 hours. She wasn't in uniform, not technically. She wore a fitted white athletic top under an open tactical jacket, camo pants bloused into her boots, and a wrist ID band that most people wouldn't have looked at twice. Her hair was pulled back, no jewelry, no makeup, nothing that screamed rank or title. She looked to the untrained eye like 100 other fit young women who might have been attached to the base in some support capacity. A trainer maybe, a dependent, someone's girlfriend visiting for the week. That was the assumption. That was the mistake. Rex walked beside her on a loose lead. A German shepherd built like a small tank, ears up, dark eyes, moving across the room with the quiet precision of a dog that had been trained to see everything and react to nothing unless commanded. He didn't bark. He didn't pull. He simply walked, and the space around Ava and Rex seemed to naturally widen the way it always did when people sensed something without being able to name it. Ava picked up a tray. She scanned the hot food options with the same flat efficiency she applied to everything. Protein, carbohydrates, hydration. She was halfway through deciding between the chicken and the fish when she heard the voice. Hey. She didn't turn right away, not because she was ignoring it, because she was calibrating. That single word carried a specific kind of weight that she had heard before. The tone of someone who already believed the answer before asking the question. Hey, you, in the white top. In. She turned. Sergeant Kyle Maddox was not a small man. He stood 6'2" with the build of someone who had spent years under heavy iron and believed deeply in the message that physical size communicated. His uniform was crisp. His posture was aggressive in the practiced way of a man who had learned early that projecting dominance was the fastest way to establish control. He had 3 other Marines behind him, younger, watching him, the way junior enlisted always watched their NCOs in moments like this. Waiting to follow the temperature of the room, Maddox looked at Ava. Then he looked at Rex, then back at Ava. This isn't a dog park, he said. And this line is for military personnel. You need to move. Ava looked at him for exactly 2 seconds. Not with anger, not with fear, with the calm, measuring quality of someone taking a reading. I am military personnel, she said. Her voice was quiet, conversational, like she was discussing the weather. Maddox's expression shifted slightly, not softening, recalibrating. I don't think so, he said. I've been on this base 3 years. I know who belongs here. You a dependent visitor, because I'm going to need you to step out of this line right now before I have you escorted off the premises. The Marines behind him exchanged looks. One of them, a lance corporal named Devin Walsh, felt something move through him that he couldn't quite name. He'd seen dozens of people get the Maddox treatment. Most of them shrank. Some argued. A few got loud. But this woman was just standing there. And there was something about the stillness of her that made the back of Devin's neck prickle. I said move, Maddox repeated. I heard you, Ava said. She didn't move. The line around them had gone quiet in that spreading, rippling way that silence moves through a crowd when something real is about to happen. Conversations dropped off. Trays stopped sliding. Eyes moved without heads, turning the subtle surveillance of people who wanted to watch but weren't sure yet which way this was going to go. Maddox stepped closer. He invaded her space the way men like him had learned to do. Close enough to be threatening without technically making contact. Close enough to communicate without words that he could escalate this whenever he wanted to. Rex made no sound, but he shifted his weight. Just slightly. His gaze fixed on Maddox with the focused intensity of a dog who had been trained to read threats, and what he was reading right now was not something he liked. "Do you know who I am?" "Know who?" Maddox asked. "Sergeant Kyle Maddox," Ava said. "3rd Battalion, 1st Marines. You've been stationed here 28 months. Your fitness scores are solid. Your conduct record has 2 formal reprimands in the last 18 months, both for inappropriate behavior toward junior personnel." The silence in the mess hall dropped another register. Maddox went very still. "How do you know that?" he asked. "Because it's my job to know it," Ava said. The Lance Corporal Devon Walsh felt the prickling on his neck intensify. He looked at her wrist. At the ID band, there was an insignia on it, small, dark. He'd seen something like it once before in a briefing that he hadn't been supposed to be in the door left open by accident, a classified presentation he'd caught about 30 seconds of before someone noticed and closed it. He remembered the symbol because it wasn't standard issue. It wasn't any branch designator he'd ever been taught. It was operational. A Tier 1 unit marker. He looked at the woman again. He looked at the dog. Something cold and clear moved through him. "Oh," he thought. "Oh no. This is your last warning," Maddox said, his voice dropping low, the register of genuine threat rather than performance. "You walk out of this line right now or I will physically remove you. Am I clear?" "Sergeant," Devon said. "Shut up, Walsh." "Sergeant, I think maybe you should." "I said shut up." Maddox reached out and put his hand on Ava's shoulder. Not a grab, not yet. A press. The kind of physical contact that was designed to communicate ownership of the situation. The kind that said, "I decide what happens next." Ava looked down at his hand. Then she looked up at his face. There was nothing in her eyes that looked like fear. What was there instead was something harder to describe. The quality of someone who has already decided what they're going to do and is simply waiting for the right moment to do it. The quality of absolute, total trained control. "Remove your hand," she said. Or what Maddox said. Rex stood up. He didn't growl. He didn't lunge. He simply rose from his seated position and stood at Ava's left side, his attention focused on Maddox with the complete, unwavering concentration of a working dog who had been trained to respond to exactly this kind of threat signal. His posture said everything his silence didn't. Maddox glanced at the dog. Something moved through his expression. Not fear exactly. Reconsideration. "Your dog better not." "Remove your hand," Ava said again. Same tone, same volume, like the first time she'd said it hadn't happened. Maddox's jaw tightened. He was in front of his people. He was in front of a full mess hall. He had spent 28 months on this base building a reputation that ran on moments exactly like this one. And backing down, now backing down to a woman in a white sports top who hadn't even raised her voice was not something his entire self-constructed identity had room for. He grabbed her arm. What happened next took less than 2 seconds. Ava moved. Not dramatically, not with the cinematic explosiveness of an action sequence. She moved the way trained operators move, which is to say, with the minimal, precise, efficient application of force that accomplishes the objective and nothing more. She stepped into his grip, redirected his momentum, and had him stumbling backward before his brain had fully registered that she'd moved at all. He didn't fall. She hadn't meant for him to fall. She had meant for him to lose his footing. To feel the gap between what he thought the situation was and what it actually was. To experience in the space of a single breath the realization that his hands were no longer where he'd put them. Maddox stumbled back 2 steps and caught himself against the serving counter. A tray hit the floor. The sound rang out through the mess hall like a gunshot. Every head turned. Complete silence. Maddox stared at her. His face was red. The kind of red that comes from humiliation hitting the same nerve at the same moment as physical shock. His hands were at his sides. His chest was moving too fast. That, he said, his voice barely controlled, is assault on a non-commissioned officer. You understand what that means. I will have you arrested. I will have you. Sergeant Maddox. The voice came from the entrance of the mess hall. It was not a loud voice. It was not the kind of voice that needed to be loud. It was the voice of a man who had spent enough years in command that volume had become irrelevant because presence did the work instead. Every person in the mess hall heard it. Every person in the mess hall recognized what it meant. They turned. Command Master Chief Raymond Okafor stood in the doorway of the mess hall with 3 officers behind him. Okafor was built compact and solid, with gray at his temples, and the kind of face that had watched things most people never see and processed them until they became simply part of the landscape of a life lived at the edge of everything. He was not looking at Maddox. He was looking at Ava. And then, in front of the entire mess hall, in front of every Marine and sailor and civilian support staff member who was packed into that crowded silent room, Command Master Chief Raymond Okafor came to attention. He saluted her. The 3 officers behind him did the same. The mess hall didn't react loudly. There was no collective gasp, no dramatic exclamation. What happened was quieter, and in many ways, more devastating. It was the sound of 100 people simultaneously understanding that they had fundamentally misread something. The sound of assumptions collapsing. The sound of a room holding its breath. Maddox had gone the color of old ash. He looked at Ava. He looked at Okafor. He looked back at Ava. Who? He started, then stopped, then tried again. Who are you? Ava held Okafor's salute for a moment before dropping it. Then she turned back to Maddox and looked at him with the same level measuring attention she had given him from the beginning. Petty Officer First Class Ava Carter, she said. Senior Operational K-9 Trainer, Naval Special Warfare Development Group Counterterrorism Unit 7. I have been assigned to this installation for the last 4 months. I have clearance that supersedes your command chain by 3 levels. Maddox's mouth was open. And for the record, she continued, Rex has never once bitten a person who didn't have it coming. So far today, he's maintained excellent self-control. She looked down at Rex. Rex looked up at her. If a dog could look satisfied, this one did. Devin Walsh stood frozen beside his sergeant, processing the last 10 minutes with the shell-shocked quality of someone watching a train accident in real time. He had known. From the moment he'd seen that insignia, he had known something was wrong with this situation, and he had tried twice to signal it, and both times had been shut down, and now here they were standing in a mess hall where the most senior officers on the base had just walked through the door and saluted the woman his sergeant had grabbed by the arm. He made a decision. Sergeant Maddox, Devin said carefully, I think we should step back. Maddox said nothing. He was still staring at Ava with the expression of a man watching everything he thought he understood about the world quietly disassemble itself. Okafor walked forward. His footsteps were measured. He stopped beside Ava, and when he spoke to the room. This installation will return to normal operations, he said. Sergeant Maddox, with me, now. Maddox moved. He moved like a man in a dream, like someone operating on muscle memory, because his conscious mind had stopped processing the information coming in. He followed Okafor toward the side door of the mess hall, his 2 Marines behind him, and as he passed Ava, he didn't look at her. He couldn't. The mess hall watched him go. And then slowly, conversation began to return. Not the ordinary conversation of a lunch crowd. Something different. Something lower and more intense. The kind of talking that happens when people have witnessed something that needs to be processed out loud in order to become real. Ava picked up her tray. She looked at the food options again. Protein, carbohydrates, hydration. She chose the chicken. Rex sat at her side, watching the room with those dark, steady eyes, and the space around them remained wide and clear. Not because people were afraid of her, because they had just learned something quietly and irrevocably about the difference between what power looks like and what power actually is. Ava Carter carried her tray to a table near the window and sat down. She ate. And the base, in 100 small, invisible ways, began to change around her. The side conference room off the mess hall corridor was not a place designed for comfort. It was small, fluorescent lit, and smelled like old coffee and institutional carpet. It was the kind of room where difficult conversations happened because no one wanted them happening anywhere else. Sergeant Kyle Maddox sat in a chair that suddenly felt like it had been built for someone half his size. Command Master Chief Raymond Okafor stood across the table from him, and the distance between them, 6 feet of standard military-issue furniture, felt like 600 miles. "Sir," Maddox started. "Not yet," Okafor said. Maddox closed his mouth. Okafor let the silence do its work. He was good at that. 31 years of service had taught him that silence was one of the most precise instruments in a leader's toolkit, and he applied it now with the deliberate patience of a man who had no interest in rushing toward an outcome that the other person needed to arrive at on their own terms. Devin Walsh stood near the door. He had not been told to leave, and he had not been told to stay, and so he had made himself as small as possible in the corner, and was doing his best to become architecturally indistinguishable from the wall. Finally, Okafor pulled out a chair and sat down. "Tell me what you thought you were doing," he said. Maddox's jaw worked. "I thought she was a civilian. A dependent, maybe. Someone who had wandered into the line and didn't belong." "You thought?" "Yes, sir. And that thinking," Okafor said, "led you to physically place your hands on a superior officer in front of approximately 200 witnesses." The word physically landed like a stone dropped into still water. Maddox felt the ripples of it move through him. "I didn't know she was." "I know you didn't know," Okafor said. "That is the part that concerns me most." Maddox looked up. "You made a decision about who she was before you had a single piece of verifiable information. You assigned her a category. You treated that category as fact. And then you escalated on the basis of that assumption without checking it even once." Okafor leaned forward slightly. "In a combat environment, Sergeant, that is the kind of thinking that gets people killed." Maddox said nothing because there was nothing to say. "She could have put you on the ground in the first 3 seconds." Okafor continued. "She chose not to. She chose to give you every opportunity to stop. And you didn't take a single one of them. Not when she told you she was military. Not when Walsh tried to signal you. Not when Rex stood up. Not even when she broke your grip. You kept escalating." He paused. "Why?" The question sat in the room like something with weight. Maddox was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice had lost the practiced authority that usually lived in it. What came out instead was smaller, more honest. "Because I couldn't back down in front of my people," he said. "Because I'd already committed to it. And because—" He stopped. "Because," Okafor pressed. "Because I didn't think she could stop me." The room was quiet. In the corner, Devin Walsh stared at the floor. Okafor nodded slowly. Not in agreement, in recognition. "There it is," he said. Meanwhile, back in the mess hall, Ava was finishing her chicken and trying to have a normal lunch, which was not going particularly well because approximately 40 people were watching her with the focused intensity of people who had just witnessed something they needed to understand, and had decided that observing her eat might provide additional data. She was used to being watched. Operational environments had a way of making you comfortable with attention, whether you wanted that comfort or not. But there was something about the quality of this particular attention, the mix of awe and discomfort and recalibration, that she found more exhausting than most. She set down her fork. A young female sailor, maybe 19, had been hovering at the edge of Ava's table for approximately 3 minutes, clearly trying to decide whether approaching was a reasonable course of action. Ava had noticed her 2 minutes and 50 seconds ago. "If you're going to stand there," Ava said without looking up, "you might as well sit down." The sailor startled. Then, with the decisive commitment of someone who had already spent too long being indecisive, she sat. "Seaman Apprentice Brianna Cole, ma'am," she said, her voice tight with nerves. "I'm sorry to bother you. I wanted to say that what you did out there was—" She searched for the word. "I don't know what it was. I've never seen anything like it." Ava looked at her. The girl was young, earnest in the way that hadn't been processed out of her yet. "You've been on this base how long?" Ava asked. 8 months, ma'am." "Has Maddox done that to you?" Treated you like you didn't belong. Brianna Cole went very still, the kind of stillness that is itself an answer. He told me once that the chow line wasn't a runway, she said quietly, in front of about 30 people. Ava absorbed that. Did you report it? No, ma'am. Why not? Brianna looked at her hands. Because I didn't think it would matter. Because I figured reporting it would just make things worse. Because... She let out a breath. Because I thought the problem was me. Ava looked at the young sailor for a moment with an expression that was harder to read than sympathy, but contained it somewhere inside. The problem was never you, Ava said. Brianna Cole didn't respond, but something in her posture shifted. Something small and structural that had been braced against a weight that was no longer quite as heavy. Rex, who had been lying under the table in the way well-trained working dogs go from full attention to complete rest with nothing in between, raised his head and looked at the young woman. Then he put his head back down on his paws. He likes you, Ava said. He does. Brianna glanced at the dog with something that was halfway between terror and wonder. Rex doesn't acknowledge people he doesn't trust. You're only the fourth person today he's acknowledged. Brianna Cole looked at the German Shepherd under the table. Something happened in her face that was not quite a smile, but was moving in that direction. In the conference room, things were moving in a very different direction. Okafor had stepped out to take a call, and Maddox was alone with Devon Walsh for the first time since the mess hall. The silence between them was a different kind of silence than the one Okafor had deployed. This one was full of things unsaid between two people who had served together long enough to have a language made entirely of pauses. You knew, Maddox said. Walsh didn't pretend he didn't know what the sergeant meant. I saw the insignia on her band, he said. Second time I tried to tell you, you cut me off. What insignia? I can't tell you what unit it is, Walsh said carefully. Because I'm not supposed to know. I caught part of a briefing I wasn't cleared for. But what I saw, Sergeant, was enough. Enough to know that she was not someone you wanted to push. Maddox leaned back in his chair and put his hands on his face. He kept them there for a long moment, and the sound in the room was just the fluorescent light buzzing, and whatever that sound is that empty conference rooms make when no one is pretending to be comfortable in them anymore. How bad is this? Maddox asked from behind his hands. Walsh was quiet. Walsh, how bad? She's attached to a counter-terror unit, Walsh said. She has clearance 3 levels above your command chain. You grabbed her arm in front of 200 people right before Command Master Chief Okafor walked through the door. He paused. On a scale of 1 to career-ending, you're about an 8. Maddox lowered his hands. 8, he said. The 2 points keeping you from 10, Walsh said, are that you genuinely didn't know and that she chose not to escalate past what was necessary to disengage. Maddox stared at the ceiling. She could have taken this to JAG. She could have had me arrested on the spot. Yes, sir. Why didn't she? Walsh had been thinking about that since the moment he watched Ava Carter pick up her lunch tray as if she hadn't just dismantled a sergeant in front of the entire base. I think, Walsh said slowly, because she wasn't angry. Maddox frowned. That doesn't make any sense. That's because you keep expecting her to react the way you would react, Walsh said. And then he seemed to realize what he'd said and who he'd said it to, and he straightened in his chair. Sergeant, I apologize, that was... No, Maddox said. His voice was flat, not angry. Something more complicated than angry. No, you're right. Say it plainly. Walsh met his sergeant's eyes for the first time since they'd entered the room. The whole time it was happening. Walsh said she already knew how it was going to end. She knew who was going to walk through that door and when. She knew exactly how much force she needed to stop you without hurting you. She wasn't reacting to you. She was managing you. He paused. The way you manage a situation that you already understand completely. The fluorescent light buzzed. Maddox said nothing. She could see the whole board, Sergeant, Walsh said quietly. Every move 3 steps ahead, and she still chose the smallest possible response every single time. The door opened. Okafor came back in, set a folder on the table, and looked at Maddox with the direct assessing attention of a man who had made several phone calls in the last 7 minutes and received information that had sharpened his view of the situation considerably. "I've spoken with Captain Reeves," Okafor said. "And with Petty Officer Carter." Maddox went taut. "She's not filing charges," Okafor said. The air went out of Maddox like something deflating. The relief was so physical and so involuntary that he couldn't hide it, and he didn't try. "However," Okafor continued, and that word landed with the weight of everything that was coming behind it, "that decision is hers, and it can change. What will not change is the command decision regarding your conduct. You are being reassigned pending a full disciplinary review. You will be moved to logistics and facility support, effective 1400 hours today." The silence was total. "Facility support," Maddox repeated. "Food service and maintenance rotation," Okafor said. "For the duration of the review, you will report to Petty Officer Second Class Garza. You will do exactly what she tells you when she tells you, without commentary, without attitude, and without the application of the particular brand of interpersonal authority that put you in this room today." The particular brand landed like a closed fist. "Sir," Maddox said. His voice had gone very controlled, in the way that voices go controlled when the alternative is something that cannot be permitted to happen. "With respect, that is a significant." "It is," Okafor said. "It is intended to be." He opened the folder. "Sergeant Maddox, you have in the last 18 months received 2 formal reprimands for behavior toward junior personnel. This makes 3 documented incidents of using rank as a mechanism of public humiliation. It is a pattern. Patterns do not correct themselves." He looked up. "She said something to me when I spoke with her. She said, and I'm going to quote this directly, 'He doesn't need punishment. He needs correction.'" The room absorbed that. Walsh in the corner felt something move through him that he couldn't immediately name. It took him a moment to identify it as respect. The specific kind of respect that only forms when someone does something you wouldn't have been capable of doing yourself. Maddox was staring at the folder. "She said that," he said. "Not quite a question." "She did," Okafor said. "I'm going to be honest with you, Sergeant. In 31 years I have dealt with a considerable number of conduct cases. Most of the people who file them want accountability. Some want vindication. A very few want something else." He closed the folder. "She wants you to be better than you were this morning. I suggest you take that seriously." Maddox said nothing for a long time. When he spoke, his voice had lost everything that usually made it his voice. The authority, the performance, the practiced weight. "I will," he said. It was the smallest and most honest thing Maddox had said in a long time. In the mess hall, Ava had finished eating. She stood, picked up her tray, and carried it to the return window with the same unhurried efficiency she applied to everything. Brianna Cole walked beside her for a few steps, not quite ready to let the conversation end. "Ma'am," Brianna said, "can I ask you something?" "You can ask," Ava said, which was not the same as yes, and Brianna registered that distinction. "Were you scared at all?" she asked. "During any of it," Ava returned her tray. She looked at Brianna Cole, this 19-year-old sailor who had been told in front of 30 people that she didn't belong, and who had believed it was her fault, and who had just watched a woman stand completely still while someone twice her size put his hand on her shoulder and not move even a fraction of an inch. "Fear is information," Ava said. "The same as everything else. You feel it, you read it, you decide whether it's telling you something useful." She clicked Rex's lead. "He wasn't dangerous, he was performing. There's a difference." Brianna nodded slowly, absorbing. "How do you know the difference?" she asked. Ava looked at her. "You train," she said. "You fail, you train again. You fail better. Eventually you get to where the information arrives and you can read it without the noise." She turned toward the exit. "Cole," she said without turning around. Brianna straightened. "Ma'am, report what happened to you. All of it, every time, even the runway comment." She paused. "Especially the runway comment." Then she walked out of the mess hall with Rex at her side, and the 200 people in that room watched her go, and the silence that followed her exit was different from the silence that had filled the room during the confrontation. That silence had been shock. This one was something else entirely. This one was the sound of people thinking about something they were going to carry with them. Seaman apprentice Brianna Cole stood alone with her empty lunch tray and felt for the first time in 8 months like the problem had never been her at all. The news moved through Naval Station Coronado, the way news always moves through a military base, which is to say faster than light and with considerably less accuracy. By 1400 hours, the story had already mutated into 4 distinct versions depending on who was telling it and which part of the base they worked in. Version 1, popular among the junior enlisted, held that a female Navy operator had put Maddox on the ground with a single move and walked away without looking back. Version 2, circulating in the administrative offices, was more measured but still dramatically incomplete. Version 3, which had somehow developed a detail about Rex biting someone, was entirely fictional and had been traced back to a supply clerk who admitted he had not personally witnessed anything. Version 4 was closest to the truth and came from Devin Walsh, who had told exactly one person what he had actually seen, which meant that by 1400 hours, approximately 40 people believed they had heard it directly from him. Ava was aware of all of this. Information ecosystems on military installations were not complicated once you understood the architecture. She had been on enough bases in enough operational contexts to know how the organism worked. She let it work. Trying to correct a rumor on a base was like trying to stop a river with your hands. You didn't stop the water. You redirected it. What concerned her more than the rumors was the file that Captain Linda Reeves had placed on her desk at 1330. Reeves was the base's senior female officer, a compact woman in her mid-40s, with sharp eyes and the kind of economy of movement that came from spending 2 decades making every action count. She had served 2 combat deployments and run 3 separate command operations, and she had the manner of someone who had processed enough bureaucratic failure to be permanently unimpressed by anything that came to her on paper. "Sit down, Carter," she said when Ava came in. Ava sat. Rex settled at her feet. Reeves tapped the file without opening it. "You know what this is?" she said. "I have an idea," Ava said. "It's the 3rd report in 14 months involving Maddox and a female service member. The first 2 were filed, reviewed, and closed with administrative notes." Reeves opened the file. The first involved a female corporal he publicly humiliated during a formation inspection. The second involved a Navy nurse he blocked from accessing the medical facility parking because he decided without checking that she wasn't authorized. Both women declined to pursue formal action. She looked up. "Sound familiar?" "They were afraid," Ava said, "of exactly what happened to them before. The filing process is brutal for the person who files." "It is," Reeves said without argument. "Which is a systemic failure that I have raised 6 separate times in the last 3 years. But that's not why you're here." Ava waited. Reeves leaned back. "I want to know why you told Okafor that Maddox doesn't need punishment. He put his hands on you. He grabbed your arm. You had every legal and regulatory justification to have him arrested on the spot, and you chose not to." She paused. "I've read your file, Carter. You're not soft. So explain the decision to me." The room was quiet for a moment. "Because arresting him would have resolved my problem," Ava said, "and left the base with his. You don't treat a pattern by removing one instance of it. You treat it by changing the conditions that made it possible." Reeves studied her. "That's a sophisticated read for someone who was the one being grabbed." "I had about 4 seconds between when he escalated and when command walked through the door," Ava said. "I used them." Something moved through Reeves's expression. Respect may be moving through the specific filter that made Reeves look like she was skeptical of whatever she was feeling. "The review board convenes in 10 days, Reeves said. "Maddox's conduct record combined with this incident is going to result in a formal recommendation. The range of outcomes runs from extended corrective duty to separation." She paused. "They'll likely ask for your input." "I'll give it," Ava said. "You'll recommend leniency." It wasn't a question. "I'll recommend correction," Ava said. "Which is different. Leniency implies overlooking something. Correction means facing it until it changes." Reeves closed the file. "You're going to be on this base another 8 months, she said. You understand that what happened today has made you visible in ways that are going to complicate your operational work. I know, Ava said. Half this base is going to be watching everything you do. I know that too. And that doesn't concern you. Ava looked at Reeves with the level attention that seemed to be her default state. Captain, she said, I have done 3 combat rotations in environments where people were actively trying to locate and eliminate me. Visibility on a naval installation is a manageable problem. Reeves stared at her for a beat. Then for the first time in the conversation, something shifted in her face. Not softening, opening. The specific kind of opening that happens when someone who has been performing competence in front of another person decides for a moment to simply be present instead. I filed one of those early reports, Reeves said quietly. Before Maddox. Different installation, different man, similar pattern. She looked at the closed file. They closed it with an administrative note. The room held that for a moment. I know, Ava said. Reeves looked up sharply. I read the base personnel file when I arrived, Ava said. All of it. It's part of my operational intake protocol. I know what happened to you, Captain. I know you filed. I know what it cost you. She paused. And I know you stayed anyway. The silence between them was different from any silence that had come before in that office. It had texture to it, the texture of 2 women who had navigated the same institution from different angles and arrived at the same room with scars in different places but the same underlying map of how the territory worked. Dismissed Carter, Reeves said. Her voice was level, but something in it had changed. Captain, Ava said, and stood. She was at the door when Reeves spoke again. Carter, for what it's worth. She didn't look up from the file. What you did in that mess hall today, the way you did it, it mattered. Ava didn't answer right away. Then she said, it needed to. She walked out. Across the base in the Facility Services building, Kyle Maddox was learning how to mop a corridor properly under the supervision of Petty Officer 2nd Class Rosa Garza, who was approximately 5'3", had been running facility operations for 11 years and had absolutely no interest in the feelings of reassigned NCOs. You're pushing the water instead of pulling it, Garza said without looking up from her clipboard. You push it, you spread it. You pull it, you move it. Maddox adjusted his grip on the mop handle. He had not spoken voluntarily since arriving at 1400 hours. He had answered questions in monosyllables and performed each task assigned to him with the mechanical compliance of a man operating on autopilot, because his conscious mind was fully occupied with processing what the last 4 hours had done to his understanding of himself. Walsh had tried to come by at 1430. Maddox had told him through a closed door to go back to the barracks. He needed to be alone with this. You have K9 unit experience, Garza asked suddenly. Maddox looked up. No. You ever work with working dogs? Any context? No. Garza made a mark on her clipboard. I ask because I saw part of what happened in the mess hall. I was coming in through the side door when Okafor's unit arrived. She didn't look at him. I watched her break your grip. Maddox said nothing. She pulled your elbow in toward her center while she rotated out, Garza said. You never had a chance. The moment you made contact, she had already decided exactly how to end it. She paused. Do you know how long it takes to train someone to that level of response, to the point where it's not thinking it's reflex? No, Maddox said. Years, Garza said. Years of controlled failure. Being put on the ground over and over until your body learns what your brain can't teach it fast enough. She looked up from the clipboard for the first time. She earned every single second of what you saw. Maddox looked at his hands on the mop handle. I know that now, he said. Do you? Garza asked. Not unkindly, with the genuine inquiry of someone who understood that knowing something and truly absorbing it were 2 very different things. Because the question isn't really about her. The question is about the 3 women before her, the corporal, the nurse, The ones who didn't have her training and her clearance, and her K-9 partner standing next to them. She marked something else on her clipboard. "What about them, Sergeant?" Maddox felt the question land somewhere much lower and more central than anything Okafor had said, because Okafor had been addressing his conduct. Garza was addressing his character. "I didn't think about them," he said. The honesty of it surprised even him. "No," Garza said. "You didn't." She went back to the clipboard. "Pull the mop toward you, Sergeant." He pulled the mop toward him. The afternoon moved. The base continued its operations around the fact of what had happened in the mess hall, the way large institutions always continued their operations around disruptive truths. Training schedules ran. Watch rotations turned. The chow line refilled for dinner, and emptied and refilled again. But something had shifted in the specific granular way that cultures shift when a single visible act does something unexpected to the assumptions holding the culture in place. Devin Walsh noticed it first. He was in the barracks corridor at 1700 hours when he heard two junior Marines talking in the common room. They were both 20, maybe 21. They were talking about what they would have done in Maddox's place. "I mean, if I didn't know," the first one said, "I might have said something too." "You wouldn't have grabbed her arm," the second one said. "No, obviously not." "So what's the line between saying something and grabbing someone?" "Yeah." A pause. "I think the line is the moment it stops being about the situation and starts being about you," the second one said. "Like if you're actually trying to manage something that needs managing, you stay in the situation. The moment you need the other person to feel small for you to feel big, you've left the situation. You're in something else." Walsh stood in the corridor and listened to two 20-year-old Marines trying to work out the moral architecture of the afternoon, and felt something that he recognized after a moment as hope. The specific quiet kind of hope that doesn't announce itself because it's too busy doing its work. He went to find Maddox. The facility building was nearly empty by 1730. Maddox was finishing a maintenance log at a small desk near the storage room when Walsh came in. He looked up. The look on his face when he saw his lance corporal was not the look of a sergeant seeing a subordinate. It was something more stripped down than that. "I told you to go to the barracks," Maddox said. "I know," Walsh said. "I ignored it." Maddox looked at him for a moment. Then he looked back at the log. "Sit down, Walsh." Walsh sat. They were quiet together for a moment in the way that two people who have been through something together can be quiet without it becoming uncomfortable. "Tell me about the briefing," Maddox said. "The one you weren't supposed to be in." Walsh considered. "I can't tell you the unit. I genuinely don't know the full picture, but I know what I saw on the slide before the door closed." He paused. "Her team has operated in 6 countries in 4 years. The work they do with K-9 units in counter-terror contexts. Sergeant, what she does is not training dogs to sit and stay. It's integrating animal behavior and human operator capacity in live hostile environments. Rex isn't a companion, he's a weapon system." Maddox was still looking at the maintenance log, but his pen had stopped moving. "And she looked," Walsh said carefully, "like someone who brings lunches in plastic containers and runs in the morning and doesn't make a sound when she walks. Invisible," Maddox said. "Completely," Walsh said. "By design." Maddox set the pen down. "I judged her appearance," he said. It wasn't an excuse. It was a statement of fact that he was making to himself as much as to Walsh. The kind of statement that has to be made out loud to become fully real. "Yes, sir," Walsh said. "And she knew that I would," Maddox said. "She walked into that mess hall looking exactly like she did, because in her line of work, being underestimated is an operational asset." He paused. "I was the threat assessment she'd already accounted for." Walsh said nothing, because there was nothing to add to that. The storage room hummed with the sound of climate control. Somewhere down the corridor a door opened and closed. "Walsh," Maddox said. "Sergeant, what those 2 Marines were saying in the common room." He looked up. "You heard them?" Walsh blinked. "How did you?" "I came down the corridor 20 seconds behind you," Maddox said. "I heard most of it." Walsh absorbed that. "The second one," Maddox said. The one who said the line is when it stops being about the situation and starts being about you. He was quiet for a moment. How old is he? 20, Walsh said. 21 maybe. Maddox nodded slowly. Something moved through his face that had not been there in the morning. Something that the day's accounting had opened up in him the way certain kinds of pressure open things up that couldn't have been reached any other way. He already knows something it took me this long to figure out, Maddox said. Walsh didn't argue with it. Maddox picked up the pen. He looked at the maintenance log. He had 12 more entries to complete before he could leave for the night, and he was going to complete every one of them, because that was what correction looked like, not the dramatic transformation of a single moment, but the sustained, unglamorous work of doing the next thing and the next thing and the next, until the doing of it became who you were. He started writing. 40 feet away, through 2 walls and a corridor, in a storage room that had been temporarily converted into a small training space, Ava Carter was running. Rex threw a precision recall exercise at low voice command. He was performing flawlessly the way he almost always performed, because their years together had built a communication between them that operated at frequencies most people couldn't perceive. She gave him the rest command, and he dropped into position at her feet. She sat down on the floor beside him. She put her hand on his back and felt his breathing. Even. Steady. Rex did not carry the day with him after it was over. That was one of the things she had always found remarkable about working dogs. The capacity to be completely in the current moment. No yesterday, no tomorrow, just the task and the rest and the trust. Ava leaned her head back against the wall. She was tired. Not physically. The other kind, the kind that the day's particular demands built up in ways that the body didn't record, but the mind did. The weight of every decision. The management of every second of the mess hall confrontation. The conversation with Reeves. The specific exhaustion of being seen and having to decide in real time what you were going to do with that seeing. Her phone vibrated. She looked at the screen. A message from her operational team leader. 3 words. Heard about today, she typed back. It's handled. His response came in under a minute. That's not what I heard. I heard it was more than handled. I heard you were exactly who we trained you to be. She looked at the message for a moment. Then she put the phone down and looked at Rex. Good boy, she said quietly. Rex's tail moved once. Deliberately. The way his tail always moved with the specific economy of a dog who understood that every action communicated something. Outside the base, settled into its evening configuration. Lights changed. Rotations shifted. Somewhere Kyle Maddox completed his maintenance log and signed his name at the bottom. Somewhere Brianna Cole sat down at her desk and opened the formal reporting portal for the first time, stared at the blank fields for a long moment, and began to type. The runway comment. The 30 people who had watched. The 8 months of carrying it like it belonged to her. She typed until her hands shook. Then she submitted it. Brianna Cole's report landed in Captain Reeves's inbox at 22:17 on a Tuesday night, and by Wednesday morning it had been read 3 times. By Wednesday afternoon, 2 more women had filed. By Thursday, there were 5 reports total, each one documenting a separate incident involving Sergeant Kyle Maddox, each one describing a different woman on a different day, in a different location, on the base, and each one containing somewhere in its carefully measured language the same essential shape of the same essential thing. A man who had used the authority of his rank and the architecture of public humiliation to make women feel like they did not belong in the spaces they had earned the right to occupy. Reeves read all 5 reports in sequence without stopping. Then she picked up her phone and called Okafor. We have a problem, she said. How big? Okafor asked. 5 reports, 5 separate women, 14 months of documented pattern. She paused. And those are just the ones who filed. The silence on the other end of the line had weight to it. The review board convenes Monday, Okafor said. I know, Reeves said. I'm moving it to Friday. Okafor said nothing for a moment. Carter's going to need to know. Carter already knows, Reeves said. She knew before I did. That's the part that keeps staying with me, Raymond. She walked into that mess hall 4 months after arriving on this installation, and she had already read everything. She already understood the pattern. She just needed him to make it visible. Another silence. "You think she planned it," Okafor said. "I think she was prepared for it," Reeves said. "Which is a completely different thing." Ava received the notification of the moved review date from Reeves's office at 0700 Thursday morning. She read it once, set her phone down, and finished her coffee. Rex watched her from his position near the door with the focused attention he gave everything in the morning hours, when his working instincts were highest and the world was still quiet enough to read clearly. "Friday," she told him. Rex's ears moved forward. "Yeah," she said. "Me too." The report of the accelerated timeline moved through the base by mid-morning, and the effect it had on Kyle Maddox was something that Devin Walsh watched happen in real time from a distance of about 12 feet. They were in the facility corridor together. When Maddox got the notification and Walsh watched his sergeant read his phone, go completely still, and then put the phone in his pocket with the careful deliberateness of someone managing a response that had nowhere appropriate to go. "Sergeant," Walsh said. "I'm fine," Maddox said. "I didn't ask." Maddox looked at him. For a moment the practiced authority that lived in his face tried to reassemble itself, and then it gave up because the last 3 days had done something to the infrastructure that held it in place. "5 reports," Maddox said. His voice was flat. Not angry, not defensive. Something rawer than either of those things. 5 separate women. I knew about the corporal. I didn't know about the others. Walsh said nothing. "I told myself the corporal was a specific situation," Maddox said. "I told myself I'd been having a bad week and I handled it wrong and it wouldn't happen again." He was quiet for a moment. "I told myself that same thing twice more after that, and apparently I was wrong twice more after that, and I don't even remember it. That's the part I keep getting stuck on, Walsh. I don't even remember." "Because it wasn't significant to you," Walsh said carefully. Maddox turned and looked at him. "Not as a judgment," Walsh said. "Just as a fact. The things we do that don't register as significant to us are usually the things we do on autopilot. Habit. Default behavior." He paused. "Which means it wasn't a bad week. It was a pattern. And patterns don't need you to remember them. They just need you to keep doing them." Maddox stood with that for a long moment. "When did you get this smart?" he said. "I've always been this smart," Walsh said. "You just weren't listening." The unexpected honesty of it moved through Maddox like something physical. He made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but contained the structural bones of one. "No," he said. "I wasn't." The facility maintenance log on the desk between them had 47 completed entries in Maddox's handwriting. 47 tasks performed over 3 days in a building he had never set foot in before Monday. 47 small, unglamorous, entirely necessary pieces of work that kept a military installation functioning, and that no one who performed them received any recognition for. Maddox had done all 47 of them without complaint, and Petty Officer Second Class Rosa Garza had noted it in his evaluation log in the precise, factual language she applied to everything. "He works," she had written. "No attitude, no commentary. He shows up and he does the task." It was not a compliment in any traditional sense. But from Garza it was close. On the other side of the base in the K-9 training facility that had been Ava's operational home for the past 4 months, something was happening that had nothing to do with review boards or conduct reports. It was quieter than any of that, more complicated. The training facility ran 6 dogs at any given time. 3 German Shepherds, 2 Belgian Malinois, and 1 Dutch Shepherd named Cassius, who was the most operationally gifted dog Ava had worked with in 4 years of training, and also the most personally difficult in the way that the most gifted operators of any species tended to be difficult because their capacity exceeded the ordinary structures built to contain it. Cassius had a new handler assigned to him 3 weeks ago. Staff Sergeant Marcus Teller, 26, decorated, technically proficient, and absolutely convinced that the key to establishing dominance with a working dog was to establish it early and establish it clearly, and not let the dog have any confusion about who was in charge. The relationship was not going well. Ava had been watching it for 3 weeks and letting it develop toward its natural conclusion, because sometimes the most important lessons were the ones that arrived through the specific friction of reality rather than through instruction. But Thursday morning, when she watched Teller attempt a force-based correction on Cassius in response to a hesitation that had been caused by Teller's own timing error, she decided the natural conclusion had arrived. "Teller," she said. He turned. He was breathing hard from the exercise sequence, and his jaw was set in the specific way that people's jaws set when they know something is wrong but haven't admitted it yet. "Come here," she said. He came. Rex, who was lying at the edge of the training area, watched Cassius with a calm that communicated to the younger dog, through some channel of animal understanding, that the situation was being addressed and everything was going to be fine. "What happened in that last sequence?" Ava asked. "He hesitated," Teller said. "On the recall command, I applied a correction." "He hesitated because your command came a full beat and a half late," Ava said. "You were thinking about the next phase before you'd finished executing the current one. Your timing broke down. He read the break in your timing as ambiguity, and he paused to resolve it. That's not disobedience. That's a dog doing exactly what you trained him to do, which is wait for a clear signal before committing." Teller was quiet. His jaw was still set. "You applied a correction to a dog for accurately reading your mistake," Ava said. "What does that teach him?" The jaw worked. "That hesitation has a consequence." "It teaches him," Ava said, "that you cannot be trusted to tell the difference between his error and yours. And once a working dog loses that trust, you spend months rebuilding it. Sometimes you don't rebuild it. Sometimes that dog never works at the highest level with that handler again." Teller looked at Cassius. The Dutch shepherd was standing about 15 feet away, watching them both with those amber eyes that always looked like they were calculating something. "So what do I do?" Teller said. Not a challenge, a genuine question. "You go back to the beginning," Ava said. "Not punishment. Rebuild. You go back to the exercises where you both succeeded, where the communication was clean, and you work forward from there. You let him relearn that you can read the situation accurately." She paused. "And you work on your timing." Teller nodded slowly. He looked at Cassius again. Something moved through his expression that was not unlike what Walsh had seen move through Maddox's face in the corridor. The particular expression of a person recognizing that the problem they thought was external was actually internal, and that recognition landing hard enough to require a moment to absorb. "It's the same thing, isn't it?" Teller said. Ava looked at him. What happened in the mess hall? What you're telling me now?" He gestured toward Cassius. He decided what the situation was before he had accurate information. He applied a correction to the wrong cause. He paused. That's what Maddox did. The comparison sat in the air between them. "The mechanism is the same," Ava said. "The scale is different. But the outcome is the same," Teller said. "Someone pays for an error they didn't make." Ava looked at him for a moment with the measuring attention she gave to things that surprised her in useful ways. "Yes," she said. "That's exactly right." Teller turned back to Cassius. He walked toward the dog without rushing it, without the aggressive forward posture he'd been defaulting to, and he crouched down at the dog's level and held out his hand, palm up. Cassius regarded him for a long moment with those calculating amber eyes. Then he stepped forward and pressed his nose against Teller's palm. It was a small thing, but in the economy of working dog communication, it was enormous. Ava turned away and let them have it. Friday came the way significant days always come, with the same ordinary packaging as every other day, and a completely different weight inside it. The review board convened at 0900 in the formal conference facility on the administrative side of the base. 7 people sat around the table: Reeves Okafor, 3 officers from the conduct review panel, the base, JAG officer, and the independent review advocate whose job was to ensure that the process served the facts rather than the institution. Maddox sat on one side of the table. He had his conduct record in front of him. He had requested it himself, which none of the board members missed, because most people in his position arrived at these proceedings having done their best not to look directly at what they'd produced. Ava sat across from him. She had Rex at her feet, and a folder she didn't open on the table in front of her. She was in service uniform with her insignia visible, and the effect of it in the formal conference room was different from the effect of the white athletic top in the mess hall, but the person inside the uniform was identical to the person who had stood in the chow line and not moved. Maddox looked at her when he sat down. She looked back at him. He nodded. It was small. It was not an apology in any articulate form, but it was something that required him to initiate, and he initiated it. She acknowledged it with a slight inclination of her head and returned her attention to the panel. The board went through its process. The reports were read. The timeline was documented. Each of the 5 filing women had submitted written statements. 2 of them, including Brianna Cole, were present in the anteroom and available to speak if the board requested it. The JAG officer walked through the regulatory framework with the careful, thorough efficiency of someone who had done this before and understood that the thoroughness was not procedural formality, but the mechanism through which actual accountability was built. Maddox answered every question. He did not deflect. He did not contextualize excessively. When asked about the corporal incident, he said he remembered it and had told himself it was situational. When asked about the nurse, he said he had not recognized it as part of a pattern. When asked about Tuesday's mess hall incident, he said he had made multiple decisions based on assumption rather than information and had escalated when he should have stopped. "At what point did you realize you were wrong?" the independent advocate asked. Maddox was quiet for a moment. "In stages," he said. "The first moment was when she didn't react the way I expected her to. The second was when Walsh tried to stop me and I overrode him. The third was when she broke my grip." He paused. "But the moment I actually understood the full scope of what I'd done wasn't until Petty Officer Garza asked me about the other women. The ones before Carter. The ones who didn't have her resources." The board was quiet. The board was. "She asked me what about them," Maddox said, "and I didn't have an answer. And that was the moment I understood that I hadn't made a mistake on Tuesday. I'd been making the same mistake for over a year. I just happened to make it in front of someone who could show me what it looked like." The advocate made a note. Reeves spoke next. "Petty Officer Carter, the board has your written input regarding recommended outcome. I want to give you the opportunity to speak to it directly if you choose." Ava looked at the panel. "My written input stands," she said. "I'm recommending against separation. I'm recommending extended corrective duty, mandatory command leadership retraining, and a 12-month supervised return to NCO responsibilities with quarterly conduct review." She paused. "Separation removes the problem from this base and puts it somewhere else. Correction is harder and slower and less satisfying, and it's the only thing that actually works. The board absorbed that." The board absorbed. One of the conduct review officers leaned forward. His name was Commander Hatch, and he had the look of a man who had formed an opinion early in the proceedings and was now deciding whether the rest of the evidence supported it. "You were the person he put his hands on," Hatch said. "You have standing to request the maximum outcome. Why don't you?" Ava met his eyes. "Because I'm not doing this for me," she said. "I'm doing it for the next woman who walks into a chow line on any installation where this man serves. If he leaves here unchanged, she faces the same pattern somewhere else." She paused. "If he leaves here different, she doesn't." Hatch studied her for a long moment. "And you believe he can be different," Hatch said. It was not quite a question. It was a test of her red. Ava looked across the table at Maddox. He was looking back at her. His hands were flat on the table. His face had none of the performance it had carried in the mess hall. What was there instead was something unguarded and honest, and underneath it something that was working very hard to become something better than what it had been. "Yes," she said. "I do." The board recessed at 11:15. In the anteroom, Brianna Cole sat in a chair with her hands clasped and her back straight, and the expression of someone who had made a decision they were not entirely sure they were strong enough to have made, and was now committed to it regardless. Beside her sat the corporal from the first report, a woman named Yara Jenkins, who had driven 3 hours to be there, and had told Brianna in the waiting room quietly and without drama that she had almost not come, and had decided to come because if she didn't, the next woman would be sitting in this room alone. They did not know each other before today. They sat together without speaking because sometimes the right response to shared experience is not words, but the simple fact of occupying the same space and not leaving it. At 12:07, the board reconvened. Reeves delivered the finding. Sergeant Kyle Maddox would serve 90 days of corrective duty assignment. He would complete the Command Leadership Development Program, the full 16-week version. He would be returned to NCO responsibilities at the end of 90 days conditionally, under a structured 12-month review with his conduct record flagged for any subsequent incident. If any subsequent incident occurred within the review period, the case would be reopened and separation would become the primary recommendation. Maddox received the finding without expression. He signed the acknowledgement form. He stood when the board stood, and then before he moved toward the door, he turned to face the table one more time. His eyes moved across the room with the specific quality of a man trying to commit something to memory, because he needed it to be permanent. "I want to say something," he said. "For the record." Reeves nodded. Maddox took a breath. "I am not going to stand here and explain why I did what I did. I understand enough now to know that explanations are not the same as accountability, and I don't want to confuse the two." He paused. "What I want to say is that I heard every word of this, every report, every statement, every piece of the pattern I made without seeing it." He looked at Ava. "And I understand that the reason I have the outcome I have instead of a worse one is because someone chose correction over punishment when she had every right to choose differently." He held her gaze. "I won't waste that." The room was quiet. Ava said nothing. She didn't need to. Some things are received in silence because adding words to them would reduce them. This was one of those things. Maddox walked out. The door closed. Yara Jenkins in the anteroom heard the footsteps in the corridor and straightened in her chair. When the door opened and Reeves looked in and told her and Brianna that the finding had been delivered and documented, Yara sat still for a moment longer than necessary. Then she let out a breath that she seemed to have been holding since she drove those 3 hours and arrived, and sat down and decided not to leave. "Okay," she said, "just that." But the word carried the weight of a year of staying quiet. A year of carrying something that was never hers to carry. A year of telling herself the way Brianna had told herself that the problem was her. "Okay," Yara Jenkins said again. And this time it sounded like something put down. Something finally, irrevocably set on the floor and walked away from. Something that had been carried long enough and was now at last someone else's weight to manage. In the conference room, Ava closed the folder she had never opened and stood. Rex rose with her fluid and immediate, his attention already turning outward to whatever came next. She clipped his lead, and they moved toward the door together, and just before she reached it, Reeves said her name. She turned. Reeves was still at the table. She had a pen in her hand and a form in front of her, and she looked at Ava with the expression she'd worn in her office that opened quality underneath the professional surface, the place where two women who had navigated the same institution from different angles met each other without pretense. "The 12-month review," Reeves said. "I'm assigning it to your oversight." Ava paused. "You'll be here for 8 more months," Reeves said. "For the first 8 months of his review period, his quarterly evaluations come through you." It was not a small thing. It was, in fact, an enormous thing dressed in bureaucratic language. It meant that the person responsible for assessing whether Kyle Maddox was becoming different from what he'd been was the person he'd grabbed by the arm in the mess hall. "That's intentional," Ava said. "Everything I do is intentional," Reeves said. "Do you accept?" Ava looked at her for a moment. "Yes," she said. She walked out into the corridor. Rex's nails clicked on the floor beside her in the steady, even rhythm that had been the baseline soundtrack of her days for 3 years. She walked without hurrying. The administrative building was quiet at midday. Through the windows, the base moved in its ordinary patterns, and somewhere in the facility building, Kyle Maddox was walking back to a maintenance log with 48 entries in it and a 90-day correction ahead of him. And somewhere in a barracks room, Brianna Cole was drafting a message to 7 other women she knew who had never filed a report, and somewhere on the training ground, Marcus Teller was crouched at Cassius's level, with his palm up, rebuilding something that had broken one patient moment at a time. Ava stepped outside. The air hit her face clean and direct. Rex pressed his shoulder against her leg for exactly 1 second, the way he sometimes did, after sustained high-tension periods, the canine equivalent of checking in, confirming contact, verifying that they were still together and still intact. She put her hand on his head. "Good boy," she said, and meant it in every direction that mattered. The first quarterly evaluation arrived on a Monday morning 8 weeks into Maddox's corrective assignment, and Ava completed it the same way she completed every operational assessment, without sentiment, without agenda, and without any inflation of what the evidence actually supported. She wrote what she saw. He showed up. He performed every assigned task. He did not complain to subordinates, did not attempt to leverage his NCO status with Garza's team, and had not in 8 weeks made a single remark that could be classified as demeaning, dismissive, or inappropriate toward any service member, regardless of rank or gender. His attendance was perfect. His work quality was consistent. His communication had shifted in a way that was subtle enough that someone who hadn't known him before might not have noticed. But Ava had read his pre-incident conduct reports carefully enough to recognize what change looked like in the specific vocabulary of this particular man. He was listening before he spoke. It sounds like a small thing. It wasn't. She submitted the evaluation to Reeves with a single appended note. Progress is real. Continuation recommended. Reeves read it the same day and sent back 2 words. Agreed. Watching. What neither of them said but both understood was that the watching was the point. Not surveillance. Not waiting for a failure to confirm a prior judgment. The kind of watching that functions as witness. That says what you are doing matters and someone is registering that it matters. And that registration is part of what makes it sustainable. Maddox didn't know about the note. He didn't know the specific language Ava had used in the evaluation. What he knew was that the evaluation had been submitted and that he was still there. Still in the corrective assignment. Still completing the maintenance logs and the facility rotations and the 16-week leadership development program that met twice a week in a classroom on the administrative side of the base and was taught by a civilian organizational psychologist named Dr. Patricia Howe, who had the disconcerting quality of asking questions that sounded simple until you tried to answer them. The question she asked in week 6 was, "Describe a moment when you used authority as a substitute for understanding." Maddox sat in the classroom with 11 other service members who were there for various conduct-related reasons, and he looked at that question on the paper in front of him, and he wrote for 40 minutes without stopping. He filled 4 pages. He had not expected 4 pages. He had expected a paragraph. What came out instead was a document that started with Tuesday's mess hall and kept going backward through time in a way that surprised him. Surfacing incidents he hadn't thought about in years. Patterns he recognized only now that he had a name for them. Moments where he had reached for rank because reaching for understanding felt too slow, or too uncertain, or too much like an admission that he didn't already know the answer. He handed in 4 pages. Dr. Howe read them without expression. At the end of the session, she kept him back. "You wrote a lot," she said. "Yeah," he said. "Most people write a paragraph," she said. "Some people write nothing and hand in the blank sheet." "I know," he said. "I've seen those people." She looked at him with the measuring attention that reminded him in a way he found uncomfortable and useful in equal measure of Ava Carter. "The 4 pages," she said. "Was that painful to write?" Maddox thought about it honestly. "No," he said. "It was strange. It felt like finding things I'd left in rooms I'd forgotten I had." Howe nodded. "That's actually the right description." She handed the pages back. "Keep going. Not for the program. For you." He took the pages. He kept going. On the training ground, Marcus Teller and Cassius had rebuilt what had broken between them, and what had been rebuilt was stronger than what had been there. Originally, the way things that are broken and repaired correctly tend to be stronger at the repair point than at any other location. Teller had spent 3 weeks going back to foundation exercises to clean simple commands with clean simple responses, building a new layer of trust on top of the place where the old one had cracked. Cassius had accepted the rebuild with the pragmatic openness that well-trained dogs bring to relationships with humans who are genuinely trying, which is to say completely and without reservation once the genuine effort became clear. Ava watched them work from the edge of the training area on a Wednesday afternoon and felt the specific satisfaction of a thing developing correctly. Not perfectly. Correctly. There is a difference. Perfection is a static standard. Correct development is a direction, a movement toward something, and the movement itself is the success, not the destination. Rex was beside her. He was always beside her. That had not changed, and would not change for as long as they worked together, which she hoped was a very long time. "They're going to be good," Walsh said. She turned. Devin Walsh was standing 2 feet away, which meant he had approached without her noticing, which meant she was more relaxed than she was in most operational contexts. She registered that as data. "Yes," she said. "Teller figured out the right problem." "He told me about the conversation you had with him," Walsh said. "The timing error. Cassius reading the break." He paused. "He said it reframed how he thinks about authority entirely." "How so?" Ava asked. "He said he always thought authority was about who was in charge," Walsh said. "Now he thinks it's about who's responsible for the accuracy of the communication." He looked at Cassius moving through a recall sequence with the fluid precision of a dog working in complete trust. "He said the handler is always responsible, not because he's dominant, because he's the one giving the commands. The accuracy is his job." Ava watched Cassius complete the sequence cleanly. "He's right," she said. Walsh was quiet for a moment. "Then Sergeant Maddox asked me to tell you something." She turned. Walsh looked slightly uncomfortable in the way that people look when they've agreed to deliver a message that involves more emotional content than they're entirely equipped to carry. "He said he completed the 4th session of the leadership program this week," Walsh said. "He said, Doctor, Howe assigned them to identify one person they owed an acknowledgement to that they had not yet made directly." He paused. "He said he wrote your name." Ava said nothing. "He's not asking for anything," Walsh said quickly. "He made that very clear. He said it wasn't a request and it wasn't an expectation. He just wanted you to know." Walsh hesitated. "I think he needed it to exist somewhere outside his own head." Ava looked at the training ground. Cassius was sitting at Teller's feet with the expression of a dog who had done excellent work and knew it. Teller's hand was on the dog's back, and he was talking to him quietly, the low, reassuring register of a handler communicating completion and safety and well done. "Tell him I received it," Ava said. Walsh nodded. He started to leave. "Walsh," she said. He stopped. "You tried twice to stop it," she said. "In the mess hall. He shut you down twice and you tried again after the second time." She paused. "That took something. I noticed." Walsh was quiet for a moment, with the specific quality of someone who has done a thing they're not sure was enough, and is now being told it was registered by someone whose registration means something. "It didn't work," he said. "It wasn't supposed to stop it," Ava said. "It was supposed to put your position on record. Now it's on record." She looked at him evenly. "When you're in command, you'll remember that moment. You'll remember what it cost you to try, and what it cost not to succeed, and you'll build something better because of both of those things." Walsh absorbed that. "Yes, ma'am," he said. He left. Rex pressed his shoulder against Ava's leg. She looked down at him. He looked up at her with those dark eyes that had been reading her for 3 years with an accuracy that no human being had ever quite matched the specific animal intelligence that existed below language, and therefore sometimes went deeper than language could reach. "Almost done," she told him. His tail moved. The mess hall on a Thursday 6 weeks after the review board looked exactly like it always looked. Loud, hot, crowded. The chow line moved with the same disciplined efficiency it always had. Trays slid. Boots hit the floor. The smell of coffee and the day's protein option competed for dominance in the recycled air. Maddox was behind the serving counter. He had been there since 1100 hours. He would be there until 1400. He served every tray with the same economy of motion that had characterized everything he'd done in the corrective assignment. No performance, no commentary. He moved through the work the way work is supposed to be moved through, which is to say, as if the work itself is the point. He didn't see Ava until she was 3 people away in the line. She was in service uniform today, full insignia. The bars and designators and operational markers that had been invisible under the athletic jacket the first time she'd stood in this line were now fully legible to anyone who knew how to read them, which on a naval installation was essentially everyone. The people around her in line read them. The line shifted slightly, not from fear, from recognition, the specific social adjustment that happens when people become aware that they are standing next to someone who has earned something significant. Maddox watched her approach the counter. He straightened, not snapping to attention, not performing. The straightening of a man who understood that the moment required a specific posture and who was choosing that posture from a genuine place rather than a reflex one. "Good afternoon, ma'am," he said. His voice was even, respectful. It contained none of the practiced dominance that had been the signature register of everything he'd said in this room 6 weeks ago. What it contained instead was something quieter and more real. The voice of a man who had spent 6 weeks in rooms he'd forgotten he had and was still finding his way through them. Ava looked at him. She picked up her tray. The line waited without knowing it was waiting. She set the tray on the counter and reached into her jacket pocket and placed something beside the serving tray. A small flat coin, the kind that military units issued as recognition tokens, dark metal, with a K9 unit insignia on one side. On the other side, 3 words pressed into the metal in the clean functional typography of things meant to last. Control under pressure. Maddox looked at the coin. He looked at Ava. She met his eyes with the same level measuring attention she had given him from the very beginning. The quality that had unsettled him in the mess hall because he hadn't been able to categorize it. He could categorize it now. It was the attention of someone who saw things completely and evaluated them honestly, and acted from that evaluation without the distortion of ego or the noise of performance. It was the attention of someone who believed that people could be better than they were. Not naively, not as a comfort, as a discipline, as a daily practiced decision. "Remember," she said. The word was the same word she had told herself the first morning she'd walked onto this base and read the personnel file and understood the pattern she was walking into. The same word she had used every time she had chosen the smallest possible response. The same word that lived underneath every decision she had made since Tuesday at 1200 hours when she had stepped into the chow line and picked up a tray and waited for what she already knew was coming. "Remember." Maddox picked up the coin. He held it in his hand for a moment, with the care of someone holding something. They understand is not about the object. "Yes, ma'am," he said. Ava moved down the line. Rex walked beside her, his shoulder brushing her leg in the easy familiar rhythm of 3 years of working together and trusting each other completely. She carried her tray to the window seat she had chosen that first day, the one that gave her a clean sightline to every entrance and exit, because some habits are built so deep they stop being habits and simply become the shape of how you move through the world. She sat down. She ate. Behind the counter, Maddox closed his hand around the coin and went back to work. He served the next tray and the next and the next. And somewhere in the facility building, Rosa Garza was completing an evaluation log that said in her precise and factual language that the man she had been assigned to supervise was not the man she had expected. Somewhere in the barracks, Brianna Cole was reading a response to the report she had filed, the first official acknowledgement she had ever received that what had happened to her had been real and had mattered and had been heard. Somewhere in the leadership development classroom, 11 service members were looking at a question about authority and understanding and writing some of them for the first time, some of them for the 100th. The honest and difficult truth of who they had been and who they intended to become. And on the training ground, Cassius moved through a precision sequence with Marcus Teller at a level that Ava had not seen from them 3 weeks ago. The fluid integrated communication of a handler and a dog who had rebuilt their trust from the ground up and were now working at the edge of what both of them were capable of, which is where the best work always happens. The base moved. The institution continued. The ordinary machinery of military life processed its daily operations without ceremony or pause. But something inside it had changed. Not loudly, not dramatically, Not in the way that institutional change announces itself in official statements and policy documents and base-wide communications. It had changed the way the most durable changes always change in the small daily choices of individual people who had been shown clearly and without ambiguity that the way things had been was not the way things had to be. Ava Carter finished her lunch, returned her tray, walked out of the mess hall with Rex at her side, and did not look back. She didn't need to. The work was already doing what work does when it is done correctly. It was spreading outward through the system in ways that couldn't be fully traced or fully mapped, touching people in the particular private way that genuine accountability touches people, which is to say, at the level where the change has to happen if it's going to happen at all. She had not come to this base to be seen. She had not stood in that chow line to make a point. She had not chosen correction over punishment because it was easier or more comfortable or more personally satisfying. She had chosen it because she understood from 3 years of working with animals and humans in the most high-stakes environments that existed that the only changes that last are the ones that the person makes themselves. You can force compliance. You cannot force transformation. Transformation requires that the person look clearly at what they have been and choose in full knowledge of the cost to become something else. Kyle Maddox had looked. He was choosing. That was enough. That was in fact everything. Rex walked beside her in the late afternoon sun with his ears up and his attention moving across the base in the continuous reading that working dogs perform, the constant quiet assessment of the environment, the readiness that never fully rests. Because readiness is not a posture, it is a condition. A way of being present that does not exclude peace, but does not require it either. Ava Carter walked onto the training ground. She unclipped Rex's lead. He looked up at her. She gave him the release command, the single quiet word that meant, the work is done, and the rest is yours. And he moved forward into the open space with the full unburdened joy of a dog who has earned it. And she watched him, and the watching was its own kind of rest. She had carried something into this installation 4 months ago. She was going to carry something different out. Not victory, not vindication, something quieter and more permanent than either of those things. She had walked into a room where the wrong thing was happening, and she had changed it one precise and deliberate decision at a time until the room itself had changed around her, and the people in it had changed with it. And what remained when all the noise cleared was simply this. 5 women who had been heard, 1 man who was learning to be better, 1 young sailor who had stopped blaming herself, 1 lance corporal who would remember what it cost to try even when it didn't work, and 1 base that was slowly, irrevocably, without announcement or fanfare, becoming the kind of place it was supposed to be. Real leadership does not arrive loudly. It arrives the way Ava Carter had arrived. Quietly. Prepared. Already knowing what it was going to do and choosing every single time the smallest action that accomplished the most good. It does not need to be seen. It only needs to be done.